this one was different. You should only write Trump bad. This group pretended that Antifa was fake news, and they're scared of it. All of a sudden, I was getting smeared. Of course people died. The world went crazy.
The year is 2020. A young reporter at the New York Times, full of enthusiasm for her employer, is approaching a series of news stories. Her name is Nellie Bowles. Nellie, put us in the picture. I want to talk about your wonderful new book, the story you have to tell post this moment, but let's start at this moment in time. So you are there, this is your dream job. What happens next?
It was the dream of dream jobs, like beyond the dream job. It was where I was going to stay my whole life. There was no question in my mind. And it went very well for a few years. And I was doing big features and getting praise for it, which I live for, obviously. And I was having a lot of fun, honestly. And then as 2019 and 2020 and then 2021 came, the tenor in the newsroom changed.
So the first hint that you talk about in your book came before 2020, didn't it?
It was 2019 is when I first noticed it. I did a story about PragerU, which was a viral video maker with a conservative bent going on campus and making viral videos of kids on campus saying silly things. And it was a business story because it was a big media company that hadn't been written about by the Times, really. And I did a profile of them. That was my style, which was a little bit making fun, a little bit straight news, and turned it in and expected it to sail through like most of my stories had been doing. But this one was different. And I got some notes from different kind of editors at the paper, and it was that I needed to add more about disinformation. I needed to emphasize the disinformation angle of PragerU. And I was sort of confused because, like, I knew about disinformation, of course. Like, I knew what it was, but nothing at PragerU was a lie, necessarily. It was conservative, but it's not a lie. Like, if someone is pro-life, that's not disinformation. That's not a lie. That's just someone who has a really different political belief than you. And I found myself explaining this to Times editors, and it was really odd to be in this position. I was like, that's not, a conservative argument is not a fake argument inherently.
Was it a particular disinformation team, or was it all the editors generally?
Across American newsrooms, there emerged around this time these disinformation teams. And it was often an editor, a couple of reporters. In this case, the person I was interacting with the most was a consultant for whatever reason. But there were also disinformation reporters who were operating at the paper. And they were kind of fact checkers, right? Like, and they would write stories that were like, this is false and this is false. And the goal of the disinformation movement was to label something disinfo and then get it deplatformed. Because what do you do with information that's false? What do you do with lies? It shouldn't be on Facebook. It shouldn't be on Twitter. It shouldn't be allowed on Google results. Like, it's a movement that pretends to be editorial, but it's extremely political. It's a very tangible goal. And the goal is it wanted to get Prager off Twitter, off Facebook, off Google, off YouTube, certainly. Because if it's a purveyor of disinformation, then you can argue for that. And so anyways, in this time, 2019, honestly, I pushed back a little bit and then I went along with it. I was like, fine. So they wanted me to add in the Southern Poverty Law Center description of PragerU, which was basically that PragerU videos might lead you to then be algorithmically recommended by the YouTube algorithm to more conservative videos. And then you might even see more conservative videos after that. And so then you would be exposed to right-wing lies, is the idea.
The Southern Poverty Law Center is another part of this ecosystem that we need to just spend a minute on. What is it? What was it originally, and what did it become?
Originally, it was an amazing organization. I mean, I'm not to butcher the history, but it was an amazing organization that worked in the South on racial injustice cases. And when I was growing up, I donated to it. Like, I remember when I was in high school and college, I would give to the SPLC, the ACLU, and then and PETA. I would give just like $5 a month or something because I thought it was so cool. I liked having the SPLC was a great American organization. And it has become now like so many of these nonprofits that had really noble goals and did great work, it's become kind of like a hollowed out vessel just for whatever the activism of the day is.
So at that time in 2019, their official verdict on PragerU was that it was disinformation purveyor on the grounds that technology algorithms tended to recommend its content alongside content that was uncertain whether it was true or not. Is that roughly the logic?
You could be algorithmically connected to more right-wing content. Now, why was Prager... And it was categorized under its Hate Watch program, which the SPLC developed this Hate Watch program, or I don't know what you call it, but a lot of people and organizations were put as like hate groups. Relatively normal conservative things. Like Prager is not some radical... Prager is not Nick Fuentes. You know, like it's very different. And there was a kind of flattening where like anything conservative was like Hate Watch. I refiled the piece. It got on A1. I never thought about it again. Really, I sort of was like, fine.
Price of doing business.
Price of doing business.
The characters who choose to work in the Disinfo department, you mentioned they're quite active on Slack. They sort of make their presence known within the Times. Tell us more about them, because we rarely get sight of them.
The disinformation people within all of these newsrooms, there's ones in NBC, first of all, they kind of became stars. In some cases, like the NBC disinformation guy became sort of a star in his own right. They see themselves as almost another editor-in-chief within the newsroom. They see themselves as guardians of what is true and not true. Whereas a typical reporter, like myself, would go in and kind of be like, I don't know, like a little bit amoral, a little bit nihilistic. I'm mostly motivated by like getting on the front page. The disinformation reporter is a very political creature. I would be shocked if there was some report about disinformation on the left in the New York Times over the last 5 years. But almost 100% of the time, what disinformation is basically anything a Republican says.
There's something about the sort of power structure here, which is also so interesting, that you said they almost sit above the editorial team. So, like so often with these new movements, there's often, it seems to me, like a sense of actual personal advancement here. If you set yourself up as the disinformation king or queen, it's a career move.
So many of the censors within American newsrooms are not the best reporters. They're not the best writers. It's almost universally that they aren't the best writers and aren't the best reporters. The best reporters at the Times don't like this movement. And they're still there working hard and doing great stuff. They don't like these sort of little Slack censors running around telling them that talking to Trump anytime is a lie and that you should only write Trump bad. It's basically what they would prefer.
I guess they do their own fact-checking as well, these veteran reporters.
Yeah, I mean, it's hilarious because they're these, in the case of, I mean, most of them at that time, they're like these sweet 27-year-olds who have, I'm sure, good intentions. But in my case, they became sort of obsessed with me because I was really interested in a lot of the things that were going on in 2020 and that in 2021 that they didn't want reported on. I mean, this group pretended that Antifa was fake news. They said that it was very important within the Times to pretend that Antifa was not involved with the BLM protests at all, and that they had no involvement with the riots and the fires.
Antifa is short for anti-fascist, and it's basically a violent group. Is that fair? They encourage sort of mob activity.
Armed left-wing group of protesters originated in the Pacific Northwest, became a sort of style of protest across America over the last couple of years, where everyone wears black, where the idea of escalating to violence is accepted. And it was very important, at least for a couple of years, to very much deny that Antifa was happening. When I tried to go up and report on Antifa taking over a neighborhood in Seattle, which I thought was a pretty funny story, they took over the gay neighborhood of Seattle. That's, as a gay person, I felt I had a right to go and see what's going on. And doing that and wanting to do that, even when my colleagues heard I was pitching that, editors were kind of interested, like, okay, cool. My colleagues became incensed. And it became like this crazy thing that I wanted to go up there. And why did I want to go up there? And when I came back with a story, and that story got printed, then basically they openly were calling me a fascist. And they openly were saying, she's out of the tribe now. Like this, it was through doing a little bit of reporting that was unacceptable to basically the disinformation movement.
The story then, you went to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which is this section of Seattle that basically became controlled by protesters, and there was no police presence during that weird summer of 2020. And what did you find? What was in the story that they found so offensive?
Well, I confirmed that there were Antifa members there, obviously, running the borders and organizing the protests. And that was really important to not confirm. That was considered, I mean, remember when the Tom Cotton op-ed was withdrawn and the editors all resigned over it and things like that, one of the corrections that was given to the Tom Cotton op-ed was that it wasn't true that Antifa was part of the BLM protests. So that was a really important lie for the Times to uphold.
So did anyone try to prevent you publishing that story, or did it manage to get through?
I actually was blessed with very nice editors, by and large. My actual boss at the Times was great. The leadership of these institutions, like the leadership of Harvard, or, well, in Claudine Gay's case, maybe not, but the leadership of a lot of American institutions doesn't particularly like the bottom-up movement that has happened over the last 5 years. But they're kind of caught flat-footed by it. They don't know how to respond to it, and they're scared of it. It was the first time I found myself on the other side of Twitter, basically, because I had only been on the good side of Twitter. I'd been part of canceling people. I'd been like a good soldier. And then all of a sudden, I was getting smeared for a story, and people I knew, people I'd had dinner with, were tweeting that I was a fascist, or that I was spreading disinfo, or it was crazy. It was like my head started spinning from it.
So you found yourself on the wrong side of, what do we call it, received wisdom, high status opinion.
And very quickly I realized, I mean, it was between doing that reporting and then I started dating Bear. And it was like things were over for me real fast after that.
This is Bari Weiss, your wife and co-founder of the Free Press, just so we, again, if any of our audience don't know who Bear is.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I started dating a known dissident, sort of heterodox liberal. The rhetoric around anyone with mild political difference within the Times is so hilarious because it's all, we're talking about just like left-wing progressives versus normal liberals. Like the bounds of this conversation are so small and so petty. And really the last 4 years were a battle between left-wing progressives and moderate or whatever liberals. Because the conservatives had no role in this. You would never cancel a conservative person. That wasn't like part of the conversation. They weren't around. So when people in these newsrooms would use the rhetoric of like these right-wing extremist reporters, they were just talking about like more moderate Biden voters. It's hilariously small-minded. Now being outside of it and being outside of prestige media and outside of the strange bubble that is that world, you realize how kind of self-contained and small it is, and how, of course, they can't tell stories that might surprise them or might lead to a conclusion that they don't like. They can't imagine a world that might surprise them.
It's interesting you say you can't cancel a conservative person. I think that's true. It's the sort of narcissism of small differences, isn't it? That if you're 1 degree too much to the right, that's where the most anger is focused. But there also seems to be, it's a sort of left on left kind of battle, isn't it?
It's a movement to purify the left. And so the most important thing for purity is to get rid of the little things that don't look right. And so the cancellations and just basically what we saw over the last 4 years has been a purification movement for the left. And yeah, it had nothing to do with conservatives.
At what stage did you actually leave the Times? Let's just get the timeline right.
By 2021. So I was there 2017 through 2021. And then as some of the rhetoric escalated and like, you know, I had editors passing around embarrassing photos of me from high school that people found on my Facebook. Like, it was getting like really weird. And very bullying.
I would say it is really important to try and work out what happened during that period, because it revealed a susceptibility in our society to some real bad habits. So let's go back to that moment, and I think it's a good place to go back to. You're sitting there in the Chaz in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. The fact that that was allowed to happen and people died.
Oh, and not just allowed, the mayor of Seattle endorsed it. She said it was like the summer of love. The city paid for infrastructure to secure the new Chaz boundaries. They paid for infrastructure to build the border. They paid for porta potties. They serviced it. And Chaz, meanwhile, wouldn't allow ambulances in, wouldn't allow police cars in, obviously. And of course people died. And it didn't even close after the first people were shot. It stayed open.
It's a very 2020s thing, isn't it? To take over physical space and declare it a zone. We've been seeing it in these campus protests around Palestine. You write about some other examples, homelessness camps that almost become little countries of their own. What is that about? Because I don't feel it was as common when I was growing up. There's a sense of that if you feel strongly about something, you need to take a piece of the earth and claim it.
It's about people taking over land and saying this is the new society and we're going to show you how much better it is. We're going to show you that you don't need police. And I think it's also about how American cities have been run by people who think that's pretty cool. And the old contract between a taxpayer who pays taxes in exchange for certain services from a city has been broken in a lot of places. And like, if you're in the American West and you're upset that, let's say you don't have sidewalks because there's an encampment 8 blocks down the sidewalk, fully taking over the sidewalk. This is very common in a city like San Francisco or Los Angeles. Let's say you don't want that encampment there. You're smeared as a bigot. You're smeared as a monster. The city will not clear that encampment. The contract of, I'm paying taxes, so we have these communal sidewalks or these communal parks. That's been broken, especially in the American West. I mean, the thing that I always love about this is all of our media, of course, is based in New York, most of it. And you have New Yorkers writing about these issues that a lot of them were American West and the Midwest. And the New Yorkers writing about this write about these homeless encampments. Like there's one in the book about the one in Los Angeles that took over a park in a gentrifying but Latino neighborhood. And it turned into a very trendy encampment where it was homeless people, fentanyl addicts, plus a lot of socialists who thought it was cool. One of the socialists would show up and park his Beamer. He drove a BMW and would park it next to the camp and then go and like organize rallies there. And the East Coast media fetishized it and turned it into like a cause du jour. And to clear that encampment would be doing a violence to a more beautiful vision of society. And the irony always for me is like, you go to New York City, you go to Central Park, it's very clean. You couldn't set up a tent in Central Park for 5 minutes before someone cleared you out. Like they live in what, compared to the rest of America, is sort of a police state. And then kind of tell us that we're bad people for not wanting to abolish the police. Anyway, that's my East versus West rant.
In the middle of all of that craziness, what's so strange is how few people have kind of acknowledged it, apologized for it, been held to account for it. I mean, I remember here in London, I was watching it all happening, and I had friends in the US who were posting things on Instagram about attending BLM marches saying defund the police, holding signs saying defund the police. These are highly paid people working in the entertainment business. And I'm messaging them saying, what do you mean defund the police? I've never got an answer to that question. And I think there are so many examples like that. It's almost like people have sort of put it to one side in their brains. And those same people you might almost find are laughing about it or misremembering that they weren't, in fact, part of the crazies. They were pretty sensible during that period. Have you observed that there's almost like a mass kind of whitewashing going on?
Absolutely. Now, so much of it is being memory holed. So much of it is being erased. There's no apologies. There's no reckoning with it. And I think the thinking is, first of all, a lot of the goals quietly succeeded and remade our institutions and remade this and that. And so the most extreme versions don't need to be talked about anymore. They're sort of, that excess. But no, right now the move is denial. I think especially as the election comes up, the move is to deny that it ever happened. And part of why I wanted to write the book was to say, this happened. This was real. You didn't go crazy. The world went crazy. And I think, I don't blame people for trying to hide that they ever thought things that are now viewed as nonsensical. But it would be nice if there were apologies, or if, let's say, some of the people who were early got their jobs back. Let's say even calling the COVID lab leak a conspiracy. Saying that was a very important thing for the disinformation reporters. That was very important. The COVID lab leak was a lie and a conspiracy theory. And if you talked about it, you were really smeared. And the New York Times and the Washington Post still have up pieces. In the Times case, I think the funniest one is a tweet that says it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. In the Washington Post, they have a story about Tom Cotton's conspiracy theory about the lab leak. These are still up. These haven't been retracted.
I've got another example of that for you, Nellie, which I think we should go through together, because it's an episode you write about, a chapter in the book, concerning the We Spa, which is a Korean spa in Los Angeles. There was a big story about a trans woman with a penis who walked through the female changing rooms. A lot of people were upset about it. There was a video that went viral. It became one of these sort of stories. And I want to put up, first of all, The Guardian's coverage of it on the 28th of July 2021. A nightmare scenario, how an anti-trans Instagram post led to violence in the streets. The first sentence there is, misinformation about We Spa, a Korean spa in Los Angeles, quickly spread around the world. Since then, trans women in LA have faced violence and online abuse. Now, I would encourage people to go and check this out because it is still up there, it is still online, and it goes on for 3,500 words. Unheard publishes long reads. We like long articles, but 3,500 words trying to say that this event was a conspiracy. It didn't happen. It is to do with right-wing extremists. They get a bit of QAnon in there. The final sentence is, We Spa represented a nightmare scenario of what can happen when far-right groups, right-wing conspiracy theorists, and gender-critical feminists are all aligned against trans rights, is the final sentence of this news story. And just before I get you to react to this, Nellie, I want to put up a second piece on the screen, which is the same outlet, The Guardian, the same writers, the same two journalists, Louis Beckett and Sam Levin. And here we are, person charged with indecent exposure at LA spa after viral Instagram video. And here, whoops, it turns out it wasn't a conspiracy. It was real, it did happen, and Los Angeles authorities have charged a 52-year-old with indecent exposure. And this person was called Darren Marega. He faces 5 felony counts, and in fact was already on a list of persons of concern to do with these kind of offences.
Yeah, so this was a great story because it came out because a Hispanic woman went to the front desk at a local Korean spa and said, there's a man wandering around with a hard-on in the spa. And the women at the front desk said, we can't do anything about this. He's got a female driver's license. And the women were like, but there's a man naked in the women's section of the naked spa. Korean spas, you walk around naked. And they were like, we can't do anything. And someone took a video of this interaction. It went viral. But the idea that these are QAnon right-wing ladies who were complaining is nuts. And so, yeah, the facts of the case, I ended up going to the courtroom and sitting next to Darren, who is a really interesting character. But
the man who exposed himself.
Yeah.
Was he or a transgender person after all, or was he a man, or what was his official designation?
Like so many people, he's kind of an eccentric, maybe has like mental illness issues. I don't want to diagnose him. I'm not sure. But he identifies as a he often, as a she sometimes. He does have a driver's license that says female. He is largely unhoused, as people say. He's homeless. And he was also planning to sleep in Wi Spa that night, which he did, because a lot of these spas are 24 hours. So you have a person who's not fitting neatly into any of your political arguments.
And yet, so, we were laughing about it there because in retrospect, it is kind of a funny story, but it's also a serious story because it ties together a lot of the things. You've got a homeless person who is needing somewhere to sleep. You've got someone walking around with an erect penis in a female changing room, which would normally be a cause for concern. And then I'm just going to read one more quote from this Guardian piece. This is how they covered it. Quote, "We are just trying to belong. For trans women who go to Wi Spa and similar establishments, the whole episode was an upsetting reminder of the dangers they face on a daily basis." This is The Guardian. It's one of the world's most respected news outlets, and that's how it covered it in 2021. What do we make of that?
I think that journalists became obsessed with being partisan actors and could not and would not see complexity in a situation. And to see complexity was, in this case, viewed as transphobic, trans hate. And like you said, QAnon, I'm sure. And in this case, it is a complicated case of a local homeless guy who sort of identifies as a woman, sort of identifies as a man, maybe gets off on exposing himself in public spaces. Seems like it's a thing he likes. He did it in West Hollywood earlier, and he was arrested for that as well, charged for that as well. The trial rested on how do we know if the penis was erect? Because that sort of gives a sign of intention, because he has a female driver's license, so he is legally a woman. So there's nothing wrong with him being in the women's space, technically. But if the penis was erect, I guess they could argue that it was more indecent exposure. I don't really. And so it was this funny game of the lawyers doing cross-examinations of these young women trying to say, well, if you were sitting here in the spa, how could you see Darren's penis when he walked there? And if Darren was sitting on the edge, then you wouldn't necessarily see his penis. Am I right? And then, I mean, the darkest moment was they were interrogating this one young woman, and she had the most clear-eyed sight of the penis. I mean, talking about this, and she said, "I'm not sure. It was the first penis I'd ever seen." And it was just this moment of like, oh my God, this 14-year-old in this changing room being asked to say if this guy had a hard-on or it was just a flaccid penis. She's never seen a penis before. I mean, the whole thing was crazy.
Just even that story, like, if you imagine the numbers of people that need to come together to make that whole episode happen. It's not just a partisan journalist at The Guardian. That you can kind of understand, but you got to have the court officials, the judges, the whole criminal justice machinery needs to make that episode happen. And I guess it just means that the craziness or the absence from common sense was so wide and so deep. And that's what's really terrifying.
Yes. And it's helped along by writers and reporters who refuse to acknowledge complexity. So everyone is sort of scared to talk about the complexity. In America today, if you, and we see this with how J.K. Rowling is covered, of course, if you argue for complexity in that conversation or write about it in a way that's nuanced and that doesn't just say transphobes are arguing, comma, and then a quote, yeah, you're smeared. You wouldn't be able to last in a mainstream American newsroom if you wrote about that in a way that acknowledged the complexity.
Do you feel like, in retrospect now, looking back at this period, we're now talking in 2024, do you feel things have got better? Clearly, the media company you and Bari Weiss have started, the Free Press is flourishing and doing very well. Do you think there is the beginnings of a revenge of common sense?
I do. And I write about it in the book to some extent in San Francisco, where a lot of moderates, led by Asian parents in the city, who got really politically activated, stood up and said enough is enough about some of the stuff we were living through there. Having a district attorney who refused to arrest drug dealers because he argued drug dealers are victims too. Things like that. The new editor-in-chief of the Times recently said he is a free press reader, which we love and accept all of our readers, and so are excited about that. I think that there are little pockets of reform movements happening, and I think there's some window dressing that's going on in our mainstream media institutions now. Some amount of attempts to fix things. I don't think that the Washington Post and the Times and NPR right now are going through a real reformation, though. I mean, until you see retractions, until you see the lab leak was a conspiracy, until that's retracted, then I don't really believe that that this is happening.
Although the Washington Post did recently publish an opinion editorial by Freddie Sayers about the dangers of the anti-disinformation movement, so I'm taking that as progress as well.
Their editorial department has some secret goodies. I don't know how they last, but I think eventually, as they see the success and growth of things like Unheard, the Free Press, this whole ecosystem of writers taking advantage of the fact that the old media has handcuffed themselves on the most interesting stories of the day. I mean, that's a great advantage for us as reporters, as editors. And I think eventually they'll catch up on that. I don't know. Or the disinformation people will just get more successful and we'll all be censored off the internet. I mean, if they had their druthers, if that group had their druthers, we just wouldn't be allowed. It would be illegal to do what we're doing.
Let's just pose the counter-argument, because I think we might be accused of a kind of mutual congratulation here, having a love-in, saying, aren't we doing well? What the opponents will say, watching this, is, first of all, a common critique of the Free Press that was in this most recent long-form write-up is that it's basically secretly conservative. That under the guise of this fancy word heterodox is a way for former people of the left to basically be out-and-out conservatives. What say you to that charge? And maybe it's not a charge, it's just an observation, but do you accept it?
Obviously, I don't accept it. I mean, this is, when I covered Chaz in Seattle, when I tried to do any of this reporting, I wasn't just called conservative. I was called a fascist. I mean, these people will, the movement in mainstream journalism to keep it left, to not allow traditional liberal values, traditional journalistic values to even sneak in. The movement to keep it left is obsessed with calling anything that deviates right-wing. That's the biggest insult in that community. That's sort of the most, that's their greatest insult they can think of, and they use it frequently. So, yeah, of course, anyone who's reporting on topics, if you report on the Wi Spa controversy in an honest way and write about the complexity there, you're right-wing. And in this mindset. But of course I reject it. I think it's ridiculous.
So you still think of yourself as a person of the left?
Myself personally? I think, no. Myself personally, I used to think of myself as part of a political movement, yeah. And I would say I was a progressive. I think now I feel much less certain of my politics and just more mushy moderate. But I also don't feel the need to identify so strongly with a political group. I think I used to feel like I needed to be part of a political group that was so important to me. And now I just am like, why? It only hurts you as a writer and a reporter to have convictions and have really strong politics on something. That's only bad for a curious mind. But no, I wouldn't identify that way. But I can rant about why progressives, the American progressive movement has taken the mantle of a movement they don't deserve right now. It's not, let's say the defund the police movement. It's not progressive to argue that the solution is violence interrupters who have no unions, have no pensions, yet are sent out to be in extreme situations of gun violence and get involved. And of course they're getting shot. And of course they're reporting huge amounts of danger in their day-to-day life. And that to me, that's not the progressive move. That's actually like, I would call that a conservative move of saying, let's bust up the unions. Let's bust up the pensions. Let's make this job more ad hoc. Whatever. I can rant about that. But the American progressive movement is not in line with traditional liberal arguments at all.
And meanwhile, there are those on the right as well who are not interested in a liberal, tolerant settlement. And I would say they are also increasingly vocal, increasingly influential. It almost feels, I don't know if you agree with this, it almost feels like liberals, in the technical sense, people who actually believe in a negotiated settlement, living in peace with people you disagree with, are a vanishing minority.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard. It makes sense. Doing what we're doing now with trying to maintain liberal democracy, disagreeing peacefully, coming to consensus that, is moderated between two differing factions. This is really hard for humans to do. It's not surprising that people slip back into tribalism and that they slip back into comfort with lies. It's surprising that we maintain liberalism as long as we do.
But do you think it's over? I mean, that's the real question, isn't it? There's signs of some common sense coming back, but big picture, do you think a society like the United States can return to a more tolerant, unified existence?
I do. Europe, I think, has bigger, stranger. Europe, it's kind of a different story right now. But, I do. I'm optimistic about the U.S. I'm optimistic in part because of we're just a big country. We've got a lot of voices. And as the stranglehold on communications breaks, as our mainstream media institutions see traffic fall, and as the kind of left and right wing TV shows see audience fall, and as the new world sees audiences rise and traffic rise, I think that makes me really optimistic, because the kind of left right divide is exhausting to most people. They don't identify that way. And most Americans are moderate and normal and heterodox in the classic sense, where they have a left-wing idea here, they've got a right-wing idea here. They're not doctrinaire.
Final question for you, and then I'm going to let you get on with your day. November, who are you going to vote for?
I'm sitting it out. I think it's a really bad situation, though. It's a really, these are rough options. I was excited about RFK for a minute, but then the VP,
no more.
The VP pick was too alarming. But no, I don't feel at home in a political party right now, but I think that's okay. I think most writers should feel a little bit separate from the political parties. Pundits take a spot, but no, I don't feel at home in one.
Okay, I nearly got a news story out of you there, Nellie. Thank you.
Can you imagine if I came out as a strong RFK?
Thanks for talking to us this morning, your time. And for those people who didn't catch it, Morning After the Revolution is Nellie's book, and it's a great read on a kind of a crazy period. Thanks, Nellie.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was just a pleasure to come on.
That was Nellie Bowles, author of Morning After the Revolution, Dispatches from the Wrong Side of History. She took us on a bit of a trip down memory lane there to those strange years, 2020 and 2021. At times, it almost seems funny to remember how weird it all got and the kind of strange things that our societies did. The flip side of that, to me, is just how vulnerable our societies appear to be. and the terrifying thought of whether we could repeat it all over again. Thanks to her, and thanks to you for tuning in. This was Unheard.